This is the financial arrangement holding the entire global economy together. And almost nobody talks about what happens when it starts to crack. The US government borrows more than $1 trillion every single year. And right now, the people who used to line up to fund that borrowing are pulling back. And that shift runs straight through your mortgage rate, your investment portfolio, and every corner of global finance. Every year, the federal government spends more than it collects in taxes. That gap ran at roughly $1.8 trillion in fiscal year 2024 alone. And to cover it, the Treasury Department sells debt instruments called Treasury securities, T-bills for short, term borrowing, Treasury notes for the medium range, and Treasury bonds stretching out to 30 years. Investors hand over cash, the government operates, and investors collect interest until maturity. All of that accumulated borrowing stacks into what we call the national debt, which crossed $36 trillion by early 2025, putting us debt at roughly 120 to 125% of GDP. The country owes more than everything it produces in a full year. Back in 1980, that ratio sat around 35%. In fiscal year 2024, the US paid approximately $892 billion in net interest on that debt, more than the entire defense budget. That figure exists because the Federal Reserve spent 2022 through 2024 hiking rates aggressively to fight inflation. And every time rates climb, refinancing old debt into new debt gets more expensive. The 10-year Treasury yield spent much of 2024 between 4.2 and 4.8%. A world away from the near-zero environment that made this debt load feel manageable just a few years earlier. About 77% of U.S. debt sits in domestic hands. The Federal Reserve, pension funds, mutual funds, commercial banks, and individual investors, with 23% held by foreign governments and institutions. Among foreign holders, Japan leads at around $1.08 trillion as of late 2024, followed by China at roughly $760 to $780 billion. China's holdings peaked at $1.317 trillion in 2013 and have been shrinking ever since. Yet the market absorbed those sales quietly because other buyers stepped in to fill the gap. The Federal Reserve itself became one of the biggest buyers in history, through quantitative easing, accumulating holdings that peaked around $5.7 trillion. Then, since 2022, through quantitative tightening, that portfolio shrank to around $4.3 to $4.5 trillion by 2024. A quiet but enormous withdrawal from the Treasury market. And here's what makes this especially pressing. The US doesn't just need buyers for new debt. Between $7 and $9 trillion in existing debt needs to be refinanced every single year as bills mature and older notes come due, which means the Treasury heads back to the auction block constantly, looking for takers. US Treasury securities carry a designation. No other asset fully matches the world's risk-free benchmark. What that actually means played out in 2008, when the financial crisis originated inside American mortgage markets, caused by American institutions. And global investors responded by buying more US Treasuries. Even when the US was the problem, the world still ran toward us, debt for safety. French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing named this arrangement in the 1960s America's exorbitant privilege. And John Connally, Treasury Secretary under Nixon, spelled it out bluntly when he told foreign finance ministers in 1971, "The dollar is our currency, but it is your problem." According to IMF data as of 2024, the US dollar accounts for roughly 57 to 58% of global foreign exchange reserves. Foreign central banks need dollar assets as collateral, global oil trade runs through dollars, and U.S. Treasuries sit at the center of all of it. Standard & Poor's stripped the U.S. of its AAA credit rating in 2011, downgrading to AAA and citing political dysfunction around debt ceiling fights. The strange result was that demand for treasuries actually climbed during that same period, because nothing else came close as a safe alternative. Then in August 2023, Fitch Ratings made the same call. AAA, pointing to fiscal deterioration and recurring debt ceiling chaos. Two of the three major rating agencies have now pulled their top-tier stamp from U.S. debt. In April 2025, tariff escalations between the U.S. and China rattled markets. Treasury yields spiked sharply, and serious analysts raised the possibility that foreign holders were selling treasuries as a geopolitical signal. The exact cause remains debated, but the market reaction showed how exposed this system has become. The Congressional Budget Office's projections show federal debt climbing to roughly 166% of GDP by 2054 under current policy. No crisis assumed, just the trajectory already built into the numbers. When Treasury auction demand drops, the government has to offer higher yields to attract remaining buyers. With $36 trillion in outstanding debt and $7 to $9 trillion rolling over annually, even a 1% increase in average interest rates adds roughly $360 billion or more per year in costs, on top of the $892 billion already paid in 2024. That number compounds with every refinancing cycle. Rising yields don't stay contained inside the government's budget problem either. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate tracks closely with the 10-year Treasury yields, and auto loans, corporate debt, and credit cards all move in the same direction. Higher government borrowing costs become higher household borrowing costs, which slows economic activity, reduces tax revenue, and forces more borrowing to cover the new shortfall. The self-reinforcing loop economists call a doom loop. At the far end of that pressure, the Federal Reserve could step in as buyer of last resort, creating new dollars to purchase treasuries and stabilize the market. But that process carries serious inflation risk. The dollar's purchasing power erodes. Imports become sharply more expensive, and the inflation that dominated from 2022 through 2024 would return in a form considerably harder to contain. A sudden coordinated halt in treasury buying is extremely unlikely, because the countries holding the most treasuries can't dump them without wrecking their own positions. China holds roughly $760 to $780 billion in treasuries, and selling those into the market would crash bond prices, spike yields, and destroy the value of every dollar China still holds. Some analysts call this China's nuclear option, but it is a weapon that detonates on both sides. And even if a major holder wanted to exit, there is nowhere near enough capacity elsewhere to absorb that capital. The Eurozone lacks a single unified bond market. China's own market isn't fully open to foreign investors, and gold markets are far too small. What serious economists actually worry about is the slow version. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, has made this case publicly. A gradual shift where slightly fewer foreign central banks want treasuries each year, where the dollar's share of reserves continues drifting from 71% in 2000 down to 57 to 58% today, and where the US has to offer incrementally higher yields to keep buyers engaged. That process is already running, already measurable, and it compounds even when no single data point looks catastrophic. The US debt market isn't on the verge of collapse. Dollar dominance, the absence of credible alternatives, and the mutual damage any major holder would take from dumping bonds. Those forces are real. The 2011 downgrade proved that even a formal loss of confidence does automatically trigger the crisis everyone fears. But $892 billion in annual interest payments, debt climbing from 120% of GDP toward 166% by 2054. 2 credit downgrades. A Federal Reserve that shifted from buyer to seller, and foreign holders quietly reducing exposure. Year after year, all of it is slow, compounding pressure on a system the entire global financial order still depends on. The question isn't whether something breaks tomorrow. The question is whether the decisions being made right now are building stability into that system or draining it out. And the honest read of the data points in one direction. If you want to go deeper on how a rising rate environment reshapes your actual portfolio, drop that in the comments. Subscribe if this kind of breakdown is useful, and we'll see you in the next one.